Today at Wilwood Disc Brakes, we're going to show you how easy it can be to upgrade your Chrysler 300 brakes to our AERO4 rear big brake kit. Before we begin, it's very important to read through our datasheet instructions designed for your application to verify brake lines, wheel clearance, and look for any variations that may have taken place before or after the vehicle left the factory. With the car properly secured and the front wheels removed, we suggest taking some photos of the current setup for reference if needed. Here's the 2016 Chrysler 300 we are going to install the kit on. Remove the two caliper bracket mounting bolts. Slide the caliper off the rotor and hang the caliper out of the work area without putting pressure on the brake line. Remove the bolt that attaches the brake line bracket to the body. Save the bolt as it will be reused. Disconnect the hard line from the soft line. Remove the caliper and soft line. Slide the rotor off the hub. Using a wire brush, remove any nicks or burrs on the axle hub and upright that may interfere with the installation of new brake components. This car is super clean, but with some cars, now would be the right time to degrease the mounting area of the spindle. Initially place one shim on each bolt between the bracket and the upright. Orient the bracket as shown and install using the supplied bolts and washers. Slide the registration ring onto the axle register on the axle hub with the smaller OD facing outward. Orient the rotor in the hat and attach the rotor to the hat using the supplied bolts. Apply red Loctite 271 to the threads and using an alternating sequence, torque bolts to instruction specifications. Slide the hat rotor assembly onto the hub. Install 3 lug nuts finger tight to keep the hat rotor assembly in place while continuing with the installation. Initially place 2 shims on each stud between the caliper and the bracket. Always use the same amount of shims on each of the 2 mounting bolts. Lubricate the caliper mounting studs with lightweight oil. Mount the caliper onto the bracket using lock nuts and washers. Temporarily tighten the lock nuts. View the rotor through the top opening of the caliper. The rotor should be centered on the caliper. If not, adjust by adding or subtracting shims between the bracket and the upright. Once the caliper alignment is correct, remove the bracket mounting bolts one at a time, apply red Loctite 271 to the threads, and torque to instruction specifications. Before inserting the brake pads into the caliper, you must first remove the pad retaining pins. Remove the 2 pad retaining pins from the caliper by carefully popping out the pin retaining clips and sliding the pins out. Insert the brake pads into the caliper from the bottom. With the friction material facing the rotor, secure the brake pads in place with the pad retaining pins and clips. Reinstall the caliper onto the caliper mounting bracket and temporarily tighten with the lock nuts. Check that the top of the brake pad is flush with the outside diameter of the rotor. If not, adjust by adding or subtracting shims between the caliper and the bracket. After the caliper pad height is set, torque the caliper lock nuts to instruction specifications. Slide the chassis fitting into the supplied bracket. Use the provided retaining clip to keep the chassis fitting in place. Connect the chassis fitting to the hardline. Connect the Flexline to the chassis fitting. Using the OEM bolt, mount the bracket onto the body. Next, using PTFE tape, install the 90-degree fitting into the caliper. Screw the Flexline into the 90-degree fitting on the caliper and tighten. Double check all your work for safety reasons, and when ready, perform a full system fill and bleed with new Wilwood brake fluid best suited for your application. Be sure to check again for sufficient wheel clearance and follow the directions for proper bedding of pads and pedal feel. Contact a professional if you encounter any difficulties or have any doubts or any questions.